This happened to me a couple of months ago now, but when it first happened, given how crazy it was, it took me a few weeks to collect myself, enough to type it up and post it. It's relevant for me to tell you up front that I'm a military veteran, and I have PTSD and anxiety, as well as a pretty bad case of depression that I'm currently in my 3rd year of. I've read that CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, can massively improve PTSD symptoms and in return reduce anxiety, so I've been trying various techniques at home. The problem there is, my wife and I live in a small 2-bedroom, ground floor flat with an upstairs neighbor with absolutely no concept of other people. He's a jock douchebag type who's a personal trainer, but he trains at home too, 'cause gains or whatever. The type of guy whose only 2 topics of conversation are protein powder and steamed rice. I'm sure you can just picture it. Anyway, with that being a constant issue, meditation and quiet mindfulness are just not possible with the constant barrage of noise. My solution to this was to do my normal routine during the day, but take advantage of my insomnia later on. At around 2300 or 0 flat, I would put on my coat and my shoes, and as we lived near the beach, I figured I'd take a nice beach stroll now that there were pretty much no people around. It was nice to just take a quiet walk on the sand and be mindful to the sounds of the ocean. Sounds really relaxing, right? It was the first 2 times, but you know what they say, the 3rd time's the charm. The walk to the beach from my home is not very far at all, maybe just a little over half a mile, but once I get there, I would walk to the very end of the beach until you reach the cliffs where there's a World War II artillery gun turret. That was around another half-mile-ish. Sometimes I would walk up the path to the cliff to the gun and stare out into the blackness of the midnight ocean. This was only broken by the occasional flash of light from the lighthouse. I would sit and listen to the waves crashing against the cliffs. Sometimes I would close my eyes and just concentrate on nothing but that sound. I felt safe there, knowing that I was alone, just me and the big ocean. Usually before I turned tail and head home, I would walk down to a small row of benches. They're all marked with plaques in remembrance of someone who also came and enjoyed the view, although I imagine they came during the day. The benches are also close to an old pub that was shut down years ago. I had heard the place used to get used as a dogging site or a brothel or something back in the day. So, when I saw vehicle headlights coming towards that pub, I figured it was just some young lads trying to catch potential doggers at it. I sat on the bench and waited for the car to pass by, but as it rounded a bend in the road further up, I was momentarily lit up by the headlamps. The headlights on the vehicle shut off immediately, and the car went off-road and out of sight for a moment. At this point, I was snapped into full alert, and a bit cautious. I dropped onto one knee and ducked behind the bench I had been sitting on. The vehicle drove past me. It was only maybe 40 feet from, and as the lighthouse illuminated the vehicle, I could now see it was an old beat-up Land Rover kind of vehicle, with shitty camo paint on the wings. At that moment in the darkness, someone popped out of the top of the vehicle, holding a scoped rifle and a big torch. In that instant, in my head, I was back in Iraq, and my senses felt razor sharp. I dropped onto my belt buckle and crawled into a patch of long grass adjacent to the benches. Then I got in a position where I could see them, but they couldn't see me. The man with the rifle shone his torch at the exact bench I had been sitting on. Then, the others, searching for me. He started to look all around him through the scope, looking for anywhere I might have gone. My heart was pounding so hard, I felt like it would give me away. I held my sleeve over my mouth to muffle the sound of my breathing, but more importantly, to try and hide the condensation of my breath. The vehicle started to move to get a better view of the benches, so I started slowly crawling towards the main road, as not only are there a row of houses, but also an old bus stop that I could take hard cover in if they saw me and decided to open fire. After about 5 minutes of hiding in that long grass, it started to rain. They were clearly still looking for me, but were now about 150 feet away. The man with the rifle was scanning around with his eye down the scope, so I waited till he was looking away from me to seize that moment and run for cover. I pushed my hands hard into the wet dirt to launch myself onto my feet. Then I sprinted towards the bus stop, while throwing in some zigs and zags in there just in case they had seen me. Luckily, they hadn't, and I was now far enough away that I could take out my phone and call the police. They were there with a riot van and a squad car in about 10 minutes, and as I was talking to the officers in the van, they spotted the gunner's vehicle and took off after them. The officers in the squad car stayed behind to talk to me. The rain was coming down in sheets by now. They asked me if I was absolutely sure it was a rifle, and I told them that yes, it was 100%, no doubt in my mind at all. The officers both looked at each other, and then one of them asked, "And what exactly is your experience with firearms?" I told them I was ex-army and had seen my fair share. They asked me what I was doing there after midnight, which was a pretty fair question to be honest. I explained that I quite ironically was taking a mindfulness walk. They were satisfied with my explanation, if not somewhat amused by the irony, and told me that the armed response unit was en route. I asked if they needed me to stay behind and make a statement, but the officers told me not to bother waiting around, because they most likely wouldn't need to take a statement beyond the call I'd made. Also, it was pissing down with rain, so I should just get home and get dry. It was over, but I still felt super wired, and my heart was still thumping hard in my chest. I started the long walk home, and when I was about halfway there, a police helicopter shot overhead and settled in the area where I had been sitting on the benches, with the searchlight scanning the area. It was right then that it hit me like a shotgun to the chest. What happened was fucking real, and it was right here. What the fuck? My head started swimming. My heart was pounding twice as hard now, and my legs felt like jelly. My lungs felt a bit glitchy, and I just couldn't breathe properly. I dropped to my knees, crying in the street in the pouring rain, the only light coming from a nearby street lamp with a flickering bulb as I was gasping for breath, thoughts flashing through my head. Thinking that if I had stayed still, if I hadn't hunched behind the bench, if I had done any number of things differently, or just hadn't, then I could have gurgled my last breath alone in the dark in the cold, wet dirt, and my wife would be none the wiser till the following day. I have no idea if they were even there for me, and if they were, how could they know I'd be there? I'd been there twice before, I suppose. It's not like there's animals to hunt there, beyond some foxes, but why hunt foxes from a vehicle with a rifle and torch at midnight? Anyway, I'm not ashamed to say that that experience haunted me. I guess my army training helped me stay alert and stay hidden, but I don't really know. I don't go walking at night anymore, and I have the occasional nightmare about the whole thing. Update. So today I made a call to the local police to try and get an update on what happened. After a quick description of what the initial incident was, the officer on the phone, at least I assume she was an officer, was able to find the report right away. The first officers on the scene confirmed that they had seen the vehicle, and they had gone off-road in pursuit. They had given chase over difficult terrain for as long as they were able to, but the vehicle turned off all lights and made an escape using the dark as cover. Armed response units were called as a precaution and patrolled the entire area while the helicopter was dispatched to try and locate the vehicle. Both teams were unsuccessful in finding them, as by the time they had arrived on the scene they had already gotten away. I told her I was sorry if they felt like I had wasted their time, and I guess I had overreacted on account of my PTSD, but she told me that as far as they were concerned, I did the right thing. She said there had been a few isolated accounts of gunshots having been heard in that area the last few years, so it was probably a wise idea to rethink taking my walks so late into the night. This story took place about 2 years ago. I was about 16 and 5'6". I either looked like a 12-year-old boy or a 16-year-old tomboy, depending on who you asked. At the time as well, I suffered with really bad anxiety, and you could definitely tell from my body language. This meant I was definitely visually an easy target for predators. So, there I was, just a 16-year-old kid, picking up hardbacks for my last year in school. After I was done with shopping, I decided to get a tram back to my dad's workplace and then have him take me home. It was a Sunday morning, and pretty chilly, so it definitely had a sort of uneasy feel to it. I always hated going into town alone, but no one else was available to join me, so I sucked it up and just did the deed. The trams were brand new at the time, and I had only taken them 2 or 3 times, so I was definitely hyper-vigilant on them, especially because of that anxiety I mentioned. Both hyper-vigilant so I didn't miss my stop for one, and also so that nothing weird happened, as this particular tram was notorious for housing weird people. I walk up to the stop and wait. I see that the next tram is coming soon, but there is a man waiting that's making me unbelievably uneasy. I hate assuming the worst of people, but this man was just making me so uncomfortable. As far as I could see, nothing in particular was off about him. He looked a bit scruffy, but he didn't look like those stereotypical predators. So I decided to walk away from the stop for a bit and wait for the tram coming to pass, then return and get the one after. They come often enough, and this dude was giving me such a bad vibe I just didn't want to be there with him. I walked away for a bit, taking a nice relaxing stroll to calm myself down. When I returned to the stop, though, he's still there. When I left, he definitely watched me leave. He must have waited for me to return. At that time, I was doubting myself. I was telling myself I was probably being too irrational. Something like a creepy dude following me. That couldn't happen to me, surely. Wrong. So we both hop on the tram. Mine takes about 5 stops to my dad's workplace. I walk down a bit. The man was still in my eye line, and I was in his. My dad's workplace is about a 5-minute stroll from the tram stop, but it's a walk down a quiet area, an area that someone could easily assault you or take you, and barely anyone would take notice, especially on a Sunday morning. At each stop, I was praying this guy would just get off the tram, but he never did. My anxiety hit the roof, and although the tram walk was only 5 minutes away, I called my dad and asked him to pick me up right outside the station. My dad surprisingly obliged. I think he could tell from my voice that something was off with me. All I have to do is walk out of the station and make it to the car. I still had hope in my heart that this man would not get off at my station and would just continue on instead, that I'd hopefully just be wrong. Well, here comes my stop. I get off, and of course the creepy man hops off too. No one else gets off but us two. Fuck. The man looked at me, and I looked at him. We made eye contact with each other. I could tell he was planning on walking in my direction and following me out. I could see him panic a little, and then he walked in the opposite direction to me. Now the chilling part about this is, the station only has one exit. The man turns around and walks onto the tracks of the tram and just wanders off. I didn't stay too long to see if he would come back. I sped walked to my dad's car. When I got into his car, I double-checked with him. There's only one exit to the station, right? The tram was very new, so I thought I could still just be unfamiliar with it. What he said next covered me in goosebumps, though. He said that yes, there was only one exit for the station. This man waited for me to get onto the tram, even though he could have taken an earlier one, followed me to the station, and decided last minute to abort mission. I tried to explain it away rationally to myself. Maybe he wasn't following me. Maybe he was just a really weird guy. But why did his presence make me so uneasy that I decided to walk away and just wait for the next one? And why did he wait for the next one too, when he could have easily gotten on the earlier one? What are the chances of the man getting off at the same stop? And why did he not use the exit and walk off onto the tracks instead? It's not like I gave him a death stare or anything. We just made casual eye contact when we got off the tram. I was a 5'6", 16-year-old as well, so definitely not the definition of intimidating. All I know about this experience is that I'm glad my dad picked me up outside the station, and I never want to experience that feeling of being followed ever again. To celebrate my sobriety, I stayed at a beachside resort on a small island in Thailand. The rooms were actually separate small houses, sprawled out over a large hill. The resort was also adjacent to a smaller hotel located about 800 meters down an empty beach with a lively nightlife. I woke up at 2 one night out of hunger, no food in the room, and my husband was sound asleep. I decided to walk down the beach to the smaller hotel to grab a bite to eat. I passed by our resort's empty guard station that stood on the entrance to the beach, which casted a large spotlight onto the beach in front of the resort. I walked out of the spotlight and down about 800 meters of pitch-black beach until I reached the light cast by the smaller hotel's bar, where everyone was busy partying and getting pretty tipsy. While I ate my food near the bar, I noticed two men hanging out on the beach. Kind of watching the bar-goers. They sat apart from the party, but they could have just been chatting, smoking cigarettes. My purse was stolen a few years prior on a beach in Ibiza, where the police informed me that locals often preyed on drunk tourists. Due to this previous experience, I watched the two men on the beach out of the corner of my eye as I began to walk back down the beach to my resort. I could see one man hit the other's shoulder and kind of nudge him towards my direction. My stomach dropped, and I got a really bad feeling all of a sudden. I just walked faster, thinking that I had enough of a head start. As I hit the dark part of that beach though, I turned, but I couldn't see anything. My instincts kicked in, and I just started running. Once I get to the spotlight in front of the resort, I make a number of exaggerated waves to the empty station and yelled out a pretend hello to the non-existent guard. I get back to the stairwell leading down to my hotel bungalow, and I started to feel really silly. Perhaps I'd freaked myself out for no reason. Then, though, I heard footsteps. I stopped cold and ducked against the wall at the foot of the stairwell that wasn't visible to the pathway up from the beach. Before I ducked, though, to my shock and horror, I saw that the footsteps belonged to the same two men I had seen at the bar. There also was nothing on this end of the beach except for these bungalows. Luckily, the pathway forked. I heard them walking around for a bit, with my heart beating in my chest and almost passing out. After a few minutes, I maneuvered my key into the door and slipped quietly into my room. I didn't know what to make of it, to be honest, but later I read that rapes and violent thefts against tourists were not uncommon on that very small island. The resort itself got involved and said that oftentimes the beach is dangerous. I would 100% go back, because other than that encounter I felt completely safe. All I can say though is thank God I was sober.